Light versus dark, good versus evil, Altuve versus Garcia. This is a story that is as old as time, but we would be foolish to think that God versus Satan is anything like the stories that we read in books or we see in the movies. The Bible makes it clear that there is a real war that is raging all around us. It's not a symbolic fight against a symbolic enemy. It is a literal fight against a literal enemy. And the stakes are high. This is the picture that Paul paints in Ephesians chapter 6 as he writes his letter to the church at Ephesus, and you can start making your way there right now. We've been studying Ephesians in our community groups, and it's not too late for you to jump in. In fact, right now we've got 3 classes that are meeting out in the portable buildings, and at 11 o'clock we've got some classes that you can jump into as well. If you want to jump into this Ephesians study with some other believers, it would be fantastic for you to just go today. There's a spot for you today, right after this service. The first half of Ephesians, it is all about doctrine. It's the core tenets of our faith. And then the second half, the last 3 chapters, Paul really gets into some practical ways that we should live out our faith and how that theology affects the people that we were created to be and what that should look like. But along the way, Paul helps us see that it's not as simple as just merely following a recipe. We're not called to an easy process. We're actually invited into a struggle where there is real opposition. That's where we get the term spiritual warfare. So we're kicking off a new sermon series today. We're going to be in the book of Ephesians, actually in chapter 6, in just a few verses for the next 3 or 4 weeks as we talk about spiritual warfare. So what does it mean to engage in spiritual warfare? And what's the difference in spiritual attack versus simply just having a bad day? And when we're under attack, what are we supposed to do about it? You see, sooner or later, every believer, every follower of Jesus discovers that this Christian life that we lead is led on the battleground, not on the playground. We face an enemy who is stronger than we are on our own. So we're going to talk about this battle. Let's dive in. Look on with me, if you will. Ephesians 6, starting in verse 10. Words of Paul to the church at Ephesus. He says, "Finally, be strengthened by the Lord and by his vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil, spiritual forces in the heavens. For this reason, take up the full armor of God so that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and having prepared everything to take your stand. Stand, therefore, with truth like a belt around your waist, righteousness like armor on your chest, and your feet sandaled with the readiness for the gospel of peace." It's important to note that these instructions, even though he says finally right at the beginning, these aren't an aside, these aren't an afterthought. Paul is actually recapping, he's reframing the whole charge of the letter to the Ephesians. Throughout most of the book, Paul speaks about the Christian life like it's a walk. He uses walk as a metaphor, even up till chapter 5. In 5:1 and 2, he says, "Therefore be imitators of God as dearly loved children, and walk in love as Christ also loved us and gave himself for us." But now, as he closes the letter, the tone changes. There's an importance that he's drawing out here. He writes with urgency. He's writing with a weight. And he changes his metaphor from talking about children who need to walk, and now he's speaking to soldiers who need to be ready to go to war. Battle, struggle, opposition are all inferred in this passage. Look back at verse 10. He says, "Finally, be strengthened by the Lord and by his vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. We live in a broken world, and we are broken people. We have a real enemy who wants nothing more than to destroy us. The devil is a real being who is wholly opposed to God and is wholly opposed to anyone who loves and follows after God. But not only does he hate God, he has a strategy, he has a game plan, and he has an army to carry it out. And so Paul clearly paints a target right on the back of our enemy, right there in verse 12. He says, "For our struggle, it's not against flesh and blood. It's against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens." So today we want to talk about how we can prepare for victory in this spiritual war that we face. And I believe every believer, every follower of Jesus can experience victory in the spiritual battles of life when we understand a few insights that we draw out of this passage. And the first is this: we have to understand the nature of the conflict. We have to understand the nature of the conflict. What is this conflict that we're getting into? Because remember, this is a literal fight with a literal enemy. Paul uses the word against 6 times in verses 11 and 12. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against cosmic powers, against evil spiritual forces. It's a fierce conflict. If you look at verse 12, you'll see just how fierce it is. The devil, rulers and authorities, cosmic powers of the darkness, spiritual forces in the heavens. This is a deadly fight, and the stakes are high. When Paul says that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces, the schemes of all of those things, he's drawing our attention to the unseen danger that is all around us. If we could see the fight, it'd be easier for us. It may not still be really easy, but it would be easier if we could see the fight, if we knew what was happening, if it was visible to our eyes, but it's not. In many ways, the forces of evil, the schemes of the enemy, work through the hearts and minds of men and women, some of whom are under demonic influence. Others are just blinded. They've been led astray by the god of this world. So what that means is demonic possession is a real thing, and it is a possibility. It also means that demonic oppression is a real thing and is possible. There are no agreed upon rules of engagement when it comes to spiritual warfare. It's not like God and Satan got in a room and they said, okay, we're going to fight fair. Satan will do anything that he can to destroy you. And this conflict has been present since Genesis 3. And maybe before that, if you read some scholars. So you might be saying, I just don't know that I buy into all of this. I think we just live our lives, and what happens, happens, and what we see, create, and do, that's it. I want to caution you, especially if you're a believer who thinks that way. I liken it to thinking, if I don't go to the doctor, that means I'm always going to be healthy. Just because you believe that doesn't make it true. Christy's going to applaud that when I say that in the next service. Not only should we understand the nature of the conflict, that it's happening all around us, that we have a real enemy that wants to destroy us, but since this has been going on since the beginning of time, we also need to understand the character of our enemy. We got to understand the character of our enemy. In the military, especially during wartime, intelligence personnel play a vital role. It's their job to let leadership know what the enemy is doing, what their scheme is, what their plan is, where they think they may be going. And the same is true for us. Unless we know who our enemy is, where he's at, and what he's capable of, we're going to have a very difficult time defending ourselves from his attacks. In Ephesians 6 and throughout the Bible, God gives us all sort of intel on our enemy. There's no reason that people who read the Bible and hear from the Lord should be caught off guard by anything that Satan wants to throw at us. Paul tells us right there in verse 11, put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. Our enemy is named right here. Throughout the Bible, the devil is called many things. He's called deceiver, liar, murderer, accuser, tempter, prince of darkness, and so on. The name Satan, it literally means adversary because he is opposed to God. Many theologians believe that in the original creation that the devil, that Satan was Lucifer, the son of the morning, as we read in Isaiah 14, that he was actually cast down because of his pride and his desire to take the throne of God. You talk about opposition, you're looking at the face of God saying, I'm going to dethrone you. There are a lot of mysteries created with the origin of Satan. But what he is doing and where he is going and what he desires in your life is not a mystery. He's a created being. He is not like God. He's limited in his knowledge. He's limited in his activity. He's limited in his authority. Unlike God, Satan is not all-knowing. He is not all-powerful. He is not present everywhere. But he is active everywhere. And he does that through a legion of his angels that follow after him. He's got organized help. Back to verse 12. These are all plurals, right? Our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's against rulers, authorities, cosmic powers, evil and spiritual forces in the heavens. This suggests that there is a definitive army that is following after Satan. In his attacks, he uses that army against you, against me, to destroy. In Revelation 12, John hints that 1/3 of the angels in heaven followed Satan when he was cast out. In Daniel 10, Satan's angels struggle against God for control of the nations. We need to know his tactics. Just a few weeks ago, a story broke that the University of Michigan football team was stealing signs from their opponents to give them an advantage in a game. And can I just say, as a Houston Astros fan, I'm appalled. I'm appalled that anybody in sports would try to get an advantage by stealing signs from some. I actually thought everybody did that, but they're in trouble for it right now. We have such an advantage as believers. God has told us the playbook of our enemy. We can know his tactics. And so in a nutshell, I want to give you some of the big ones. This isn't an exhaustive list, but here's how Satan wants to attack you. He wants to destroy you. He wants to lead you down a path of destruction. Tactics of Satan. Number one, he's going to accuse you. Satan accuses. He's going to try to convince you that you have no right to hear from God or to act on his behalf. Revelation 12, because the accuser of our brothers and sisters accuses them before our God day and night. He's been cast out. Second, he entices. He's going to try to lure you away from God's best for your life. Remember when Satan tried to tempt Jesus? He enticed him with the things of this world. You can read about that in Matthew 4. Satan oppresses. He is going to make life so difficult on you that you're going to want to give up. Satan intimidates. He will try to convince you that you cannot overcome evil and that you should be afraid of what happens if you would try. I love these words from Peter in 1 Peter 5. He says, be sober-minded and be alert because your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion looking for anyone that he can devour. Satan destroys. He will try to destroy anything he can in your life. Your marriage, Your reputation, your kids, your identity, your sense of worth, your health, those are all targets for your enemy, Satan. Satan confuses. He wants to distort what you know to be true. 2 Corinthians 4 says, in their case, the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Satan wants to cloud that vision, cloud that judgment, and distort and confuse what you know to be true. And last but not least, again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but Satan isolates. He's going to try to hinder you from what you're supposed to be doing. He's going to cut you off from your time with God, from your time with the church, from your time with other believers, so that you are alone. In our men's ministry, we have a saying that every time we get together with men's ministry, we remind each other these words: alone is, nobody? Dangerous. I heard it. Alone is dangerous. Alone is dangerous. That's not just true for men, that's true for everyone. And Satan wants to isolate you. He wants you all by yourself, away from the pack, away from protection, away from people who will remind you of the truth, hold you accountable, pray for you, love you in the hard times, love you in the good times. Think about it this way. If you had a human enemy who is seeking to destroy you, how would they do it? They would deceive you. They would lie to you. They would convince you that you needed to take steps towards doing something that was going to devastate your life. They would cut you off from those around you who love you and want what's best for you, who care deeply about who you are and where you're heading in life. They would try to steal your joy, make you feel worthless. That's what our enemy is going to try and do. He always tries to draw us out of God's protective boundaries to a place where we can experience the greatest harm. Spiritual battles that you're fighting right now are for your mind and for your heart. And the enemy and his army are fighting actively against you. Folks, those are his tactics. We know what he's going to try and do. So what should we do about it? And that brings us to the last insight from our passage. That's the secret of victory. The secret of victory. You know, all of us at our homes, we have some sort of security measure. Like everybody's house has locks on the doors. A lot of you have security systems. Most of you have doorbell monitors. If we take those measures to protect our family and our belongings, how much more important is it that we take some level of protection against the schemes of the devil? Especially now that we know how dangerous he can be, we better put some security in place. So Paul gives us in these verses the secret to a victorious Christian life. And over the next several weeks, we're going to unpack the armor of God and the weaponry that we should use to wage war. But we don't have to wait all month to understand that we fight from a place of victory. He tells us two things that we are to do if we want to have a victorious life that we've been promised by Jesus. And the first is this: we should wage war as people who are dependent. We wage war as people who are dependent. We must recognize our ridiculous need for the Lord to be present and active in our life. We must accept that our protection, it comes from the power of God and not from our own power. Do you remember how Paul calls us to war? Right back in verse 10, he says, finally, be strengthened by the Lord and by his vast strength. He doesn't say, all right, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get ready to run because it all depends on you. He says, be strengthened by the Lord and his vast strength. And we don't have time in this message today, unless y'all want to be here till like 2, to walk through the power of the Holy Spirit that every Christian, that every follower of Jesus has within themselves. But it is absolutely vital that we all understand that this is not a battle that we can win alone. Resistance to sin is only possible through the power of the Holy Spirit. Standing toe-to-toe with Satan is only possible through the power of the Holy Spirit. Living a victorious life is only possible through the power of the Holy Spirit. As we continue through this passage over the next few weeks, it's important that we remember that we are putting on the full armor of God. It's His armor. It's not our armor. It's not our strength. Too many Christians, in my opinion, are trying to overcome the work of the enemy by putting on the armor of self-help, the armor of intelligence, the armor of positive thinking. Folks, thinking positively, self-discipline, and even gaining intelligence and wisdom, those are good things. But left to yourself, no matter how sharp you are, you will be defeated if you fight your spiritual battles on your own. You're not that good. And neither am I. There's a man named Hudson Taylor. He was a missionary in the 1800s. He faced significant opposition throughout his life, especially as his ministry started to gain traction. And he has impacted millions of people through his life, his message, his leadership with the gospel of Jesus. But he didn't think that there was anything special about himself. He didn't think that there was anything within himself, in Hudson Taylor, that allowed him to keep pressing forward. But he explained it this way. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time. Hudson Taylor said this: "All God's giants have been weak men who did great things for God because they reckoned on God being with them." Let that sink in for just a second. You want to do great things for the Lord? You want to leave a legacy that outlives you? Do you want to be a giant of the faith? That's the key. I'm not that good, you're not that good, but we serve a God who is that good and can do great things with broken things, great things with weak things. When we are fully dependent on Him, Satan better watch out. When Grace was about 3 years old, that's my youngest, she really took to doing puzzles. For whatever reason, she just found some puzzles and she liked doing puzzles. And so she'd grab one off the shelf and come toddling into the living room, set it down and say, "Let's do a puzzle." So I'd sit down and we'd start working through the puzzle. And, she's 3 doing a 50-piece puzzle. And so she can't find anything that matches. Like things are upside down and she's like clipping stuff in. And so I start putting some pieces together. And then because I'm not a cruel dad, I give her a piece. And I'm like, "Hey, it goes right here." She takes the piece and she puts it in. She gets so excited. So I keep working. She'll pick up a piece. I'm like, "Sweetheart, I think that goes over here. Let's put it here." And so she'll put it in. So after a while, we get the puzzle finished. And she's so excited. She jumps up and she'd run to Chrissy and say, "Mama, look what I did." I'm going, "You didn't do anything. I did the whole thing." Folks, we're often like that. We think that we're capable of fighting our own battles, solving our own problems, but if we take an honest look at ourselves, we realize that we're not. The battle is raging around us. It's more than we're able to handle on our own. We need God, through His Word, through the power of the Holy Spirit, to lead us, to guide us, to empower us to fight the battle that we're in. The secret to victory is to wage war as people who are dependent on Him. And the second is to wage war as people who are on a mission. Maybe better said, people who know their mission. Did you know that it isn't our job to fight against Satan? That's not your job. That's not my job. We're not on the front lines of this war. We are actually the search and rescue unit. That's our job. We put on armor to protect ourselves from the fight around us, but our mission is search and rescue. Look at verse 14. Stand therefore with truth like a belt around your waist, righteousness like armor on your chest, and your feet sandaled with readiness for the gospel of peace. Readiness. What are you ready for? Without the proper footwear, fighting would be almost impossible for a soldier. The Christian, they're warrior shoes. They provide stability in the gospel of peace. There are no other shoes like these shoes. But even more, we put on those shoes for the purpose of being ready to carry the gospel mission forward on this earth. In other words, the follower of Jesus, the Christian, you were never meant to be in a spiritual foxhole, sitting on the defensive, hoping you just make it through the day. No, God has given us a great mission. So I want to remind you what that mission is. These are the words of Jesus in Matthew 28. He says this. It says, Jesus came near and said to them, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go. He says, go. He doesn't say get comfortable. He doesn't say sit and say. He doesn't say wait. He says as you go, as you live your life, you got to get out of here on a reckless mission. Go. Make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything that I've commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The most victorious Christian is a witnessing Christian. A Christian who is in the thick of the battle. If we wear the shoes of the gospel, then we have the beautiful feet that are talked about in Isaiah 52. It says, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the herald who proclaim peace, who bring good news of good things, who proclaim salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Friends, sharing your faith is the reason that you are left on this earth after you trust Jesus as your Savior and Lord, after you give Him your life. There is no greater mission, there is no greater purpose than to live in that. We carry with us the gospel of hope, the gospel of truth, the gospel of transformation. We carry with us the only way to having eternity with God forever in a real place called heaven, and that is through the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross. Satan, our enemy, he has declared war. But we have been left here with a very specific mission. Search and rescue. To find those who are perishing. To find those who have never tasted the sweetness of the gospel. And to share with them the greatest gift of all time. That Jesus loves them. That Jesus died for them. That Jesus wants a relationship with them that will never end. Folks, I fear that many of us, especially in the Western church, many of us who should be on active duty are either retired or on the reserves. Folks, our enemy is not going to stop until he destroys all that he can. And that means there's a role to play for every single believer. So as we take a moment to respond this morning, I wonder if there's anybody here today who needs to be rescued. If there's anybody here today who's been trying to fight this battle on their own, in their own strength. If that's you, I just want to talk right to you for just a second. I want you to know that there is peace available. There is hope available. There is power available. There is transformation available. But it doesn't start when you start working harder. It starts when you realize your need for Jesus. And And he wants to know you, and he wants to love you, and he wants to meet you right where you are today. If you want to experience victory, that's where it starts. However the Lord is moving in your heart, would you respond to him as we sing a song? I'll be down front, and there would be no greater privilege I could have than to answer some questions or tell you more about this Jesus who loves you. Would you pray with me as we close? Father, you are so good to us. God, I thank you that you have invited us into an incredible mission. God, I thank you that you didn't leave us to fight alone, but you give us your Spirit. You empower us with yourself to do the things that you've called us to do. God, I pray that you would open our eyes to the war that is raging around. But God, you would remind us that the battle is already won. Father, would you go before us? Would you remind us of your goodness and your grace? And God, would you continue refining us into the men and the women that you created us to be? And God, I pray for a harvest of souls. God, that we would take this mission so seriously that your word, that the gospel of truth, that the joy and the hope and the love of Jesus would be just on all of our lips, coming out of our mouth, in our schools, at our jobs, in our neighborhoods. And God, that you would do the work of saving. But God, that we would be faithful to playing our part in this war. We give this time to you. It's in the name of Jesus I pray. Amen. Would you stand?